Hello, and welcome to the Artfully Learning audio series. I'm your host, Adam Zucker. As a writer focusing on a cross-examination of the visual art world and educational environment in order to show the benefits art has on overall learning, it's incredibly exciting when I come across others who are also passionate about these themes, because it's a great way of expanding my network of artists who are working at the forefront of play-based artistic processes and materials-centered artworks with an educational focus. My previous Artfully Learning audio series guest, Jeff Casper, alerted me to one of his MFA students at UMass Amherst named Sally Curcio, who cited my piece, Learning Through Play, Playing Through Art, in her thesis paper, Tableaux for the Future. I was honored to be referenced in her research, and I felt rewarded because this experience introduced me to Sally's artwork, and I was immediately compelled to write about it in a blog post. So essentially, the connection we had through our writing has come full circle. Sally's work is a vital part of the lineage that learning through play and creatively exploring with educational materials like blocks has had on shaping our overall society. Making models using educational materials and found objects has long inspired the optimistic visions of architects and artists whose work shows us what is possible in a well-balanced and functioning society. A common foundation behind many great works of art and architecture is that they combine aesthetically compelling forms to create functioning structures that elevate the way humans live, work, and relax. Creating such structures requires a strong visual and conceptual mindset and process, and the flexibility to try many different outcomes before arriving at a finished project. It also necessitates an astute understanding and feel for working with a range of materials and three-dimensional objects, many of which are actually derived from the educational play materials designed for young children. The adjoining element between educational manipulatives, art, and architecture is that children are apt to recreate and interpret their environment to emphasize their worldly observations and express their lived experiences through play. These actions lead to the construction of knowledge and awareness of our presence and potential in the world. With global civilization in a state of constant flux and turmoil, envisioning a brighter world has been a key component of many artists' practice. Sally's work references the seriousness of play by creating imaginative architectural tableaux envisioning futuristic models for utopian societies. Her aims and objectives are in line with the pedagogical concept of learning through play and recreating and interpreting worlds based on observations, experiences, and materials-based explorations. What stands out from Sally's sculpture and installations is the unbridled optimism and playful sense of possibility, expressed through a complementary combination of form, color, balance, and scale. Overall, the structures that make up the tableau have a very unified look. This arrangement is made even more familiar and comforting when you take the time to look closely and realize that Sally has repurposed everyday materials like combs, ice trays, and egg cartons to represent the affordances of objects in urban spaces. By using ordinary materials in extraordinary ways, Sally's art makes a statement that we can achieve great and beautiful things in our everyday lives, even when it seems as though the odds are stacked against us. The ingenuity required to transcend the notion that something is impossible is an artistic habit of mind. Art educator and pedagogical theorist Judith Burton defines this quality as resistance to closure. This essentially means thinking with an open mind and depicting a multitude of meaning and possibilities in aesthetic forms and artistic experiences. Similarly, theorist and educator Elliot Eisner calls this habit of mind making judgments in the absence of rules. In Eisner's words, the arts teach students to act and to judge in the absence of rule, to rely on feel, to pay attention to nuance, to act and appraise the consequences of one's choices, and to revise and then to make other choices. Getting these relationships right requires what philosopher Nelson Goodman calls rightness of fit. Artists and all who work with the composition of qualities try to achieve a rightness of fit. A better world is not out of the question, and art has a variety of answers and visionary examples that should inspire us to work towards making the idealistic elements of futurist societies a distinct possibility. This is what I'm looking forward to discussing with Sally today. Hi, Sally.
How's it going?
Going well.
Yeah.
How
Oh,
about
good.
yourself?
Good. It's nice. It's a day off from having to go to UMass today. So I work at a gallery on campus.
That's really cool. The University
Yeah.
Gallery is a great space.
Yeah. Wait, it's like part of the Fine Arts Center. I work at Hamden Gallery, so it's in a certain area of UMass. And yeah, I've been working there for some years now, but I just became associate director.
Oh, congrats. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
that keeps you busy in addition to your artistic practice.
Yeah, it does. And I get to talk with different artists and um, just be, in the arts even more, which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it is a great experience for sure. Definitely a cool way of knowing the ropes, behind the scenes, which a lot of
Yeah.
artists don't often get until they do something else outside of the studio.
It's good to be on both sides. Like, then you're like, as the artist, like, when you're the gallery director, you know what the artist is going through. And then when you're the artist, you know what the gallerist is going through. you know,
That is so true. We need more of that, like balanced kind of experiences all around. Yeah.
right? It's like, okay, I'm in your shoes now. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely important.
I'm looking at the stuff in your space behind you. That you have like a
Oh
cool
yeah.
sculpture going
Yeah.
on.
Thank you. My little art studio. I
Yeah.
guess it's sort of just become storage. I don't really make as much work as I used to, and I started teaching, so it kind of went to the back of my mind and my practice. So, but
You need a deadline. That's what you need. You need a deadline.
yeah,
That's always my secret. I'm like, okay, I have no time. Deadline. Then yeah,
that's true. I've been giving myself that encouragement or prompts really or demands on myself, but yeah, flexible demands.
I do programming for the gallery, so I'll have to see more of your work.
Yeah, it's great too that you mentioned that you're affiliated with the University Gallery because I've been thinking for a while, sort of curating exhibitions around artfully learning. Not my work, but
Yeah.
as a curator, I've never really focused on the concept of education, which is my passion. So it's kind of makes sense of something that I would want to make a proposal around, and then having that be an exhibition would definitely have to be experiential and participatory because it wouldn't just stand as work on a
Love that
wall or a
idea.
pedestal. So, it makes
Yeah.
sense that I wanted to collaborate with something participatory and care based for a while. The idea
Mhm.
of art as optimism, something we'll talk about, today, which
Yeah.
would be really cool
Really.
just to, yeah, just to float that around, and the thing I like about these conversations too is I get to meet amazing artists and like it's amazing the connection
I know.
here because I
Yeah.
get analytics on my website, but I don't know exactly where they're coming from. So it's I see like Blackboard or Schoolology or whatever those online things are for colleges and universities coming and clicking on the website links, and I see which articles that play article gets insane amount of. I don't know why it's so popular.
I it popped up when I did like a Google. I was like, I need to find stuff about play, and I'm like, okay, this sounds good. I really like this, and then I added it in, and it's what a cool thing that you read the paper and saw that you were in
Yeah,
it.
it's it's
Jeff,
nice.
yeah. So Jeff told you about it. Jeff
Jeff
is
told me about it. Yeah, but he didn't tell me right away. Like it's like we were just planning to do a conversation. I had wanted to do a conversation with Jeff for a while, and he mentioned he's like, I have a student who cited one of your blog articles in their thesis, MFA thesis, and then I said, "Oh, I wasn't aware of that at all." But that's amazing because that's basically it's the reason why I do it is just to provide a resource, an additional resource, and extend the conversation. So it's really amazing to me when I can see how artists like
yeah.
yourself making the connection between play or these concepts, these educational concepts, and then the work that you're doing. It's really interesting to me. That's sort of what I write about. So it's nice to see it become tangible.
Yeah, I know. It's like a perfect thing. It's a perfect thing that I was like, "Oh my gosh." Like for some reason I saw the article, but maybe I don't know how I missed that you had this whole website. I don't know. I was, probably in frantic thesis mode, but yeah.
Yeah.
So I was just like, this is totally up my alley, and um, yeah, play has been a big part of something I recognized in my work and in my process. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And definitely upon looking at it then and reading your thesis, I really saw that. I mean, it was very indicative.
yeah,
One of the things in the Artfully Learning Audio Series tradition is the icebreaker topic, really, to get the ball rolling. And
mm,
it's the foundation behind learning artfully, learning through the arts, and developing artistic habits of mind. And I'd like to start out by asking you to recall some of the earliest artistic experiences or any formative types of artistic education that made an impact on your creative development.
yeah. I know. I was thinking about that, and I kind of break it down into like two different things, like one, like what happened in school and stuff that happened at home. And I mean, definitely, like, playing with blocks was a huge thing, and um that's something like that was it, in kindergarten, and then also at home, and like building forts, like, so like at home it became much more loose and not like in the field of like education. So I have like all these different memories of art stuff. Um, so like at home, the environment, I grew up in Brookline, and I moved to Rockport in my high school years, but we had different craft projects at home. So like beads and candle making, and my mom painted. So I was really exposed to a lot of different art forms, and she did graphic design, and I would like, look through magazines and get really stimulated by looking at graphic design too. And but yeah, so in school we kind of had like the basic stuff of like drawing, painting, and then like in my time, like making ashtrays out of clay for, take this home to your parents, and they're gonna smoke. And I'm like, they didn't smoke, but um, so it was like much more structured, and I enjoyed art a lot, in class, but at home was kind of the place I really kind of let loose more and explored things more on my own. So, um, like with candle making, I would like dip my fingers. My mom had like a double boiler set up with like wax, and I would like dip my fingers in the wax, and then I start like building them up. So I like had these huge fingers of wax, and like, I just got more like sculptural. We didn't really have sculpture in school, like besides the younger years of building and creating. And like I was just very enchanted by the artistic experiences were more like observing that kind of influenced my work now too. It's like observing like the Christmas tree. Like I was just like, I love the Christmas tree. It's so beautiful and this magical world. And we had like little ornaments that were miniatures and stuff that inspired my work later on. And and then like we lived on the street, and like at the top of the street there was like a housing complex, but in front were like all these beautiful globes, like these globe lights. So I like built a bench, like put like a stick in the corner of the chain link fence kind of corner of our front yard, and I would sit there and like stare up at the lights and just kind of observe like the beauty of the lights. That I think like those experiences really like of observation and imagination really came into my art later on.
I can see that, especially when you mentioned the miniatures and the vibrant colors. That's apparent in the work that you do now.
Yeah.
But
Thanks.
observation, I like that you mentioned the combination of observation and action,
Yeah.
hands on learning, as well as just being a conscious observer, taking the time to sit and be meditative in front of phenomena,
Yeah.
which is really a artistic habit of mind, something the arts help us to hone, whether we are conscious of it or not. I think that's one of the great things is that it's a conscious and an unconscious kind of
Yeah.
learning.
I was just thinking, like, I remember going to like the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and seeing Goya. and a Goya exhibit and like an Andrew Wyeth exhibit, and being like just so wowed, like, going into a gallery or a museum, you're observing, and then like you leave the space. And then I think like with magic markers, like my smelly magic markers at home, I was like, I'm gonna carefully like the work is so detailed and so well done. I was like, I'm gonna put these markers and the smells and like put them together in such a way that's like more exacting. So like just that observation and then taking that with you and then implementing it in your own way, um, is the learning and the observing.
It's really cool when that all comes together and you are then feeling efficacious that you said you're able to be inspired by something, some experience or stimuli that you observe in the world. Or museums are great to do that. I love going to the museum and then oftentimes having thoughts in my head and being on the subway home or late at night, recalling what I saw, in the notes that I took, and just the ability to sit there and let yourself get inspired is something that is so important. And how we spend our time, I think in this fast-paced world, it's really great that we do have art that enables us to do that and to notice details and as you said, make it our own, whether it's responding by creating a work of art or just interpreting it within our own framework of experience and background and identity.
The more I think about it, the more I think, just those experiences, like if kids could, bring all kids to museums and, like let them, just give them even more experiences. Like, yeah, so that we can take that in. And I just think about how important it was for me.
It's true. I mean, museums are essential parts of the community. Museums and libraries, really the places that are often free and or accessible enough you can get into them. Yeah, galleries especially, they're free, whereas museums might charge some admission. Generally, galleries are, you can just walk into a fine art gallery. You don't have to be a collector. Some people may be a little trepidatious about doing that, but it's well worth it to do too. So it's twofold. It's that making art education accessible through spending time in gallery spaces. I think that's a great place to really kick off a formal art education, seeing work within a gallery and then responding to it, and having art professionals there like yourself who are working artists being able to facilitate conversations in art. So it's always full circle. That's why I love to ask that question. It's because your early experiences going to museums had definite impact on the art profession and then the arts administration profession. I'd like to talk about how you came into your current practice of making tableaux, especially when we're talking about noticing details. These are miniature works. They're very detailed and nuanced, and it takes a lot of observation to take it all in one or more viewings. And also that these works are indicative of somewhat of a utopian society. And I especially want to focus on how art can be a profound source of optimism and envisioning potential near future solutions for social, cultural, and economic issues that we are collectively facing today. And especially in my heightened conscious, and I'm sure many others who are listening to this in light of 2020, where society basically came to a screeching halt as we know it for many of us that had not been an experience we were accustomed to before. Optimism really seems to be a rare trait, both in art and everyday life, because a lot of art is reflective of these sort of crises. So I'm eager to hear about how you stay upbeat and express encouraging outlooks on life, creativity, and civilization as a whole through the artwork you create. So this is essentially a two-part question. Perhaps you can start us off by describing the concept behind your tableau installations, and then address the importance behind maintaining an optimistic portrayal of our shared environments when envisioning future structures and societies.
Yeah. So the first question about the tableau. Yeah. So the tableaus kind of emerged out of my bubble work. I created these bubble sculptures that I've exhibited in museums and did commissions, and they're these kind of beaded bubble worlds. So they were inspired by snow globes. So they were very protected. They're like under a dome. So the feeling of those were like nostalgic and protected. And I was thinking about ecology and, kind of they were like these little idealized versions of like real and imagined places and made up places, mythical places. And they're like 12 by 12, like 6 inches high about, and then I did bigger ones too, but I did a number of the smaller ones. So they were inspired by kind of like the tableaus that like kind of emerged out of this and like also departed from this work. Um, but that work I loved like I kind of like taking something that isn't really valued, like snow globes, and then turning it into like, subverting it and being like, oh, this is a now very valuable thing, like a snow globe world. And then I was very interested in like I had like an epiphany moment. I was traveling out west and I walked into a Thomas Kincaid gallery, which is like very saccharine sweet, like these cottages, like all rainbow colors. And I was always like, oh, this stuff is so gross. Yeah, like I can't stand it. And then I went in, I was kind of tired, and I'm like, oh my God, this world he has created is like this safe, beautiful, magical world. Like suddenly, like I totally flipped and seen what he was offering. So I wanted to incorporate that into that the bubbles. It was like that aspect. So I kind of borrow different aspects to create different worlds. And so from that work, um, I don't know, it's like I used like different lighting and colored beads. And so it was all very colorful, but and still nostalgic. But so when I kind of jumped to not jumped, but like when I did the tableaus, it came out of kind of a nostalgia for like a retro future. Like the bubbles kind of had the retro future look to them. But in this case it wasn't like the snow globey nostalgia, but a kind of thinking back to this kind of optimistic time. So like I'm attracted to that aesthetic for like what it offers in that kind of idea of what the future could be. So, and I feel like we're kind of missing that right now. Like what you're saying, we're missing the optimism. And so I wanted to take just that aspect and bring it in. But then also, I was in grad school and I was creating all this different work. And I took those elements and also incorporated them in the tableaus. So the work came from like, I did a piece called Prototype for Play. And I made like use different food packaging products and poured plaster in them and then created um, like a whole display like a basically like a long table with these objects, but I painted them different colors and then pared them down, like used a sander on them, like sanded them down so they weren't so recognizable and they started to look like blocks to me. And actually in that moment, that piece, I really felt like I was going back to childhood into that moment of playing with blocks. Like I had that moment, another kind of like, whoa, like I am being transported to this amazing freedom, place of play and freedom and building and creativity. And I want to be able to share this with people. So by paring down the objects, they kind of started to look like other things to me too. So I like this freedom of association. So um, like a milk carton, like the bottom part of like a milk jug cut in half started to look like cheese, or it could be a building, or it could be. So this idea of free association too, which also goes back to like that freedom. And I think there's like an optimism to that too that's in there because you're able to create, you're powerful, you have agency. Um, so with that piece, it was like all different kind of pastel colors, and people were invited to play with it actually. So they were invited to come and move the objects around. And then, so I actually took that piece and recycled it into the tableaus for the future thesis project. And I also did glass blowing on campus and had different glass forms and chemistry forms because we had the chem laboratory. So I basically pulled in everything I had, and I think that's part of it too. It's like a message of recycling what we have to kind of build a future. Like we have what we need. We just need to be creative with it to build like a more positive future or better functioning way of being together. And so I brought all that stuff in, and then I like this idea of like people not being so fixed on what an object is. So like this kind of letting go of functional fixedness. Like I have found objects in the sculptures too, like curlers and ice trays, and I like 4 different major like tableaux. One is like super long called Miracle Mile, and the others like that one's 32 by like 160 inches, and then the others are their platforms are like 32 by 80. And so I build these different environment worlds on each platform that are kind of similar but different. And so by using these everyday materials, when you look at it from a distance, it looks like a city of some sort, different types of cities or industry or science. And then once you get closer, you're like, oh, you start breaking it down. Like what is that? Like that's yeah, like that's something fuzzy, a fuzzy curler. Hang on. So you start to see these objects. So I think like creating that looseness is of seeing an object in different ways, like letting go of the symbolic order of objects is very freeing and allows us to think more creatively. And that goes kind of back to childhood and that freedom too, where you're playing and, a blanket is, it's a blanket. And then suddenly it's like you're building a fort with it and your roof. Um, so I think, yeah, to be optimistic, it's like you have to let go of kind of your fixed negative thoughts, or not everyone's negative, but like break out of habitual thinking. So I think that's the thing. It's like try to break out of your habitual thinking and ways of seeing things, and be more
Yeah.
goal oriented, and in the sense of like, well, what is the ideal, what do I want, and then think kind of backwards. Like everyone can relate to setting a goal. Like you're not going to be like, I can't do that, like I'm not going to set a goal, like you're going to set a goal to something you actually want to achieve, and reach that thing, and be optimistic about it.
Yeah. You hit on so many talking points that
I'm sorry.
no, don't, no, that's 100%. That's what it is about this. And that's why I think that's the amazing thing about art education, or thinking through the arts, thinking and making through creativity. Because you mentioned backwards design, which is an educational methodology and philosophy of having a goal and then working backwards to build the lesson plans, the assessments, the process, and going back to the drawing board as needed. You mentioned that was a key part of your artistic thinking and making. So, all these tenets of education are intrinsic in the arts, especially contemporary arts. So what you just said, that's what I impart upon my readers on Artfully Learning. So it's just great to hear examples from artists like yourself who are doing that and thinking that way, and breaking from the confines of what might be seen as the establishment. You gave the example of coming across Thomas Kincaid, who initially you were repelled by that work. And I'm sure a lot of us in positions as art professionals are sort of influenced, maybe prompted in a way to have that pushback against art like that, mall art or whatever that is. And his paintings look like snow globes. It's funny you mentioned snow globes. I mean, there are things to take away from that work, that we should take away from that work. And we shouldn't, I think, just be so quick to eschew things because we have these preconceived ideas that were put forth by others of what is good art or what is art in general. We're never going to get to a point where I think people are going to come up with a definition, because it's so varied and based on experience and geography and identity and so many different factors that no one's going to fully agree on that. And certainly the idea put forth that everything is art is something that can be argued with validity too. You had that aha moment going into the mall and seeing these paintings and realizing what artists who we associate with a high commercial or marketable aspect in their work are doing. It's because we all want to essentially buy something that we love. When we're in the mall, we have a consumer mentality. So if art is going to be in that same area where we're buying shoes or clothing, we want to look fashionable. We want then to have art that also makes us feel that same way and inspires us to feel good about ourselves and our condition. So yeah, it makes sense that that kind of work exists. And it's good that it does because there is plenty of art that makes profound comments about the atrocities or the human condition in a way that is important to have us reflect on things that we need to do better, but work that shows the optimism and what is possible in a good society or utopian society is also important because it gives us that drive to really get there. You know, the idea that art can make us feel good collectively and help us to see both the wonders in the natural environment, the phenomena like light and nature and all that changing of the seasons and everything, and then the beauty of everyday fabricated products and how those can be, as you mentioned, recycled and repurposed into other objects that extend beyond their initial affordances, giving them new meaning and new context, but are generally recognizable within our own collective culture as being these tangible products. It's something that we as art educators have done because we need to be resourceful due to budget constraints. So it's always been something, like having my teachers too, they'd always send notes home. Can you send Adam to school with some toilet paper rolls the next day? And we'd make whatever out of it. I mean, those were some fond memories I have. Just realizing that the knowledge that we have and the intrinsic curiosity that we have of interacting with our world and the products within our world that is always evolving, and we're always eager to create something from what's in front of us and what we see. And of course, it makes sense that the things that we use on an everyday basis, like egg cartons, toilet paper rolls, combs, hair curlers, all of that is aesthetic as well and relates to the principles of art and design. And when we think about it, we could turn those things into buildings or trees or whatever else. So what is really refreshing to me about your work is that I see your optimism and use of materials as being akin to how some of the littlest members of our society structure their play and creativity. Oftentimes, children create and play with materials that they are presented with without any reservations. So like I mentioned with the toilet paper rolls, or you give a kid a cardboard box and they turn it into a spaceship or something, you don't even prompt them. It's best if you don't prompt them. They'll come up with something, then you ask them about it and they blow your mind. So the unbridled actions that children partake in typically evokes inspiring and virtuous outlooks on life. And while this kind of experiential learning through play and materials is a lifetime-based process that begins during our earliest stages of development, like we spoke about, unfortunately, one of the most notable changes in our journey from youth to adulthood is the decline of playful learning and untutored creativity. So with all that being said, how did you rekindle your childlike nature as a professional artist, and how is play ingrained within your current artistic process and philosophy? I know you did touch upon this already a bit. So anything else you might want to expand upon on that is great.
Yeah, no, I definitely remember like getting older, like being a little kid and playing and that freedom, and then suddenly becoming self-conscious of like, what am I putting down on this paper? What am I, so like growing up, you kind of start to become more conscious of yourself and what people are thinking. And, it's like that kind of shifting. And I remember like consciously going, okay, forget about everybody else. Just forget everybody and think about like, what do I want to see? Like, what is the thing I want? Like, what do I think is really interesting to look at? And um, so it was like a real kind of, I think at the heart of it, when you're a kid, you're just doing that. Like when you're very young, you're just unconsciously like, like, I like this, I'm going to do it. I like this, I'm going to. So it's, just mentally to be like, I'm going to shut out the world. And if I just think about what I like, I'm going to go from that. And, and that has always helped me, just be like, and then of course, there's more of like, as you develop and stuff like that, it's like, okay, well, critiques are helpful. Getting feedback is helpful, but just to come from that spirit helped me let go and kind of get to that place of freedom. And wait, what was the other part of the question? It was
Basically, how you rekindled that, how you got back in touch with your inner child. And you did, I think, by saying, that you're taking risks in terms of not being so afraid of failure or critique.
I was kind of left to my own devices a lot, like just in high school and my in Rockport High where I went, my teacher had like a throat box. He had throat cancer, and so he couldn't really say much. So it was kind of like open art room. So it's like so I was kind of left to play like a bit. Like I didn't have much guidance, so I ended up what ended up doing like um, creating like getting crayons and drawing on paper, and then like playing like getting turpentine or and pouring turpentine on that, and then getting another piece of paper and then placing that on, and then coming up with some type of printmaking um, kind of thing that like created dots and interesting textures. So I think it was kind of like a blessing and a curse. I was left with a lot of time to just experiment and little guidance. And I did like a lot of collages then. But I mean, there was still that internal voice during that time. And I remember going, I'd hang out in the art room and be like, I'm just going to do what I feel like doing. And then, going to school, like going to, taking classes. I went to um, MCLA, which is Mass College of Liberal Arts, and then took sculpture at Williams College. And so there I actually started to have some training. But there is like a self-consciousness to that. But I think it started to meld in that kind of freedom and skill and um, creativity. And then I went to actually UMass Amherst for undergrad and for my thesis. I did my MFA there as well and traveled to London and took classes there. So I've always been like, I think, very experimental. And I think that's part of play is like just having that freedom to experiment. Yeah, I just kind of, I'm thinking of like the different bodies of work because there's playing with objects and playing with like what's around me to build, the tableaux, the bubble work. But even before then, I was just like buying stuff at thrift stores and thinking conceptually. So playing with ideas that um, kind of, I like to kind of mix up, like kind of change people's minds. So like that idea of having a fixed thought on something to like subvert it. Like before the before the bubble work, I did a show called Bling, where it was all about branding. So I wanted to break down our thought processes around like how we think about how the power of branding. And so I bought all these like objects at Salvation Army and then like painted them all Tiffany blue and called it the Touch of Midas to show like, so there's like a play of like playing with these other objects just to like try to break down people's thought processes too. So it's like this kind of using our ideas around objects and then trying to subvert them.
Obviously, we're inundated with objects in mass media, like you mentioned. So that's a way of helping us to synthesize the wealth of knowledge or just the overwhelming maybe amount of knowledge or objects or sometimes propaganda that we're getting through material culture. And that's why I love artistic education and the habits of mind. I mentioned those studio habits of mind, what the arts teach us, because they do help us to break free from that. Otherwise, it becomes monotonous if we're just seeing one object over and over again used for this or associated with this. But with the arts, we are able to transform both the actual object and then ideas that are associated with a particular object or media and represent it in new ways to tell narratives or to, you mentioned, to divert from its initial meaning and help us to think about potential new uses for it, which is great in terms of in an ecological sense or an economic sense too, because we can reuse what we already have in terms of our knowledge and our tangible environment. If we could just reuse that and sustain that and maintain what we already have and just find ways to improve upon it if needed or rebuild when needed, that's the key of sustainable future. That's where the optimism comes in. That's where working towards these utopian narratives and visions come about. And a lot of tableaux that you make, they do sort of reference a period in time where that optimism was abound. I know you wrote about being inspired by the Jetsons and that idea of when the Jetsons came out, I was really reflecting that retro futuristic idea that by now we should have this society in many, many ways. Obviously, that utopian vision wasn't really fulfilled. On the darker side of it is that we have that automation, that robotic influence on society with artificial intelligence, cybernetics that have taken the roles or try to assume like more human performances or identities. So by doing that, we're trying to augment or even replace in some senses the physical aspects of human manufacturing, human creation, human socialization, all of that. But we can never really replace the joys that we get out of play and the sensory value and joys that we get from handling materials. It's so interesting that, as artists, we're faced with that.
You have so many talking points. You have so many talking. Oh no, I'm like do. I could say so many different things right now. Oh my god. Yeah, but I mean, I like borrowing from that kind of optimism, but of course, we did not. It's not that utopian world that was kind of presented from the Jetsons. Even though I love that show, I mean, it was very inspiring, and the idea. I think we do need to look to science and design for solutions. Like we're going to keep progressing and developing, and it's so helpful. Like what we learn from science and how like that would be like, well, how do we, recycle plastics? Whenever, there turns out that there's a worm that likes to eat plastic. It's like there's different solutions that we're just going to have to keep going forward and building on our knowledge and kind of staying positive. I think that's where like the positivity comes in. It's like, okay, well, now we're here, but then where are we going to go from there? And keeping a creative mind, like a flexible mind, that's problem solving. We just have to continue on and problem solve. And I think those early developmental hands-on experiences, and I think like observing, different things too. Like I'm thinking of my art and me playing with my art and creating these worlds. It's not saying like that we're going to have a utopian world, but it's like, let's come from a place of positivity, of dreaming up what we do want, and then meditating on that as like a basis, not just being like, well, we're doomed. AI is taking over. I don't have a job. I'm gonna, it's like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's backwards design. Again, going back to that educational, there's so many things you can, flexible purposing, rightness of fit, all these,
I love that rightness of fit.
Educational terms that I write about on the blog, and we've spoken about then via email in the aftermath of writing about your work. But yeah, what you just said is really great, that you have that idea, the goal that you're oriented towards presenting in your work and then having us consider looking towards positivity and then working backwards, finding ways to synthesize the materials and the social structures and architectural models and all that to create this ongoing narrative. You're presenting us with what's possible. As you said, when you look at your work from far away, it's a very futuristic Jetsonian kind of city with everything's interconnected and accessible. And that was something that was very much a part of these retro futuristic visions. But then when you get closer, you see it's made up of materials that are generally considered one-time use. So they'd be not really recycled, they'd be thrown away. Or if they're recycled, are they actually getting recycled? Because sometimes we know there's a problematic history with recycling where it's not actually getting to where it should be going. We're actually just shipping it overseas in many cases. And so that's what I love what you just mentioned is really you have this concept that you want us to consider from many different perspectives that we can look at everything from. And then when we really get into the careful observation, we see how each part goes into the whole. And we consider that the objects that we're using, what purpose they have beyond their initial purpose. And how can we then structure our own lives and what we're producing and what we're interacting with in a way that becomes sustainable. So maybe getting rid of these one-time use objects or being able to employ these one-time use objects into like bricks that are used to build homes for people or medicines or things that can be used in education. And that's what I really love about your work is, it goes back to the beginning of playing with blocks like the foibles gifts. It's this progression that we take. We learn that by putting together different shapes, we're making different associations with objects in our own lives and world, and that nothing is really fixated to. These things can be taken apart and rearranged and rebuilt.
I think it's, just thinking of I definitely get into the formal qualities of these everyday objects and just appreciating, even though something is plastic or something, but just like what you had said, talked about design behind something, like it has just appreciating a design in itself. And maybe there's a solution to we could use a different material to build this and just appreciate the form. And so there's kind of extracting materiality and design too. In my mind, I like to kind of think of these things. So when you're building, you are kind of extracting, you're not you're using these forms to build something new and you're looking at it as, for its formal qualities, and going to that artistic place of seeing that object. There's the process of thinking of just appreciating our world around us, basically, appreciating shapes and as if we can only see shapes and, texture and colors and this very artistic observation. And then there's really looking at materiality and things that need to be changed and, how we need to evolve and problem solve. So I like how art and play and science, they all kind of come together in this for me, that creativity and thinking of the future, all those ideas are kind of all happening at once in the work.
Yeah, it's a very hands-on experience. And of course, it invites the imagination. You did mention some of the work is interactive. And I know, too, as part of exhibiting your work, you design and lead a lot of workshops for children.
I do.
So that to me makes sense because it invites play. I mean, your work, it is made for an intergenerational audience.
Mm-hmm.
There was definitely that aspect of childhood retrofuturism, that whole envisioning the world. Oh, we're going to grow up in this world. It's going to be so cool. We're going to fly to work. We're going to have robot friends. We're going to be able to teleport, things like that. Oh, life's going to be really accessible for us. And if we have issues, we're going to be able to solve it by these simple futuristic solutions. So that, to me, that was the optimism. I think a lot of us were presented with through media, mass media.
I think we are experiencing some of that. Like right now we're Zooming and and to me that's like, beam me up, like,
Yeah.
techie. Um, there are many conveniences. So like, okay, it's not, I don't have to, we're not commuting right now. We're time traveling through Zoom and our computers and um like I it's just perfect. It's like, "Oh, okay, I can just get right on here." So I mean there's definitely really wonderful advantages to um and that's very Jetsonian.
Yeah. It is. We definitely have achieved some of that
Some of it. Yeah.
yeah, and the magical aspect of it too. I mean, yeah, you do see like generally Zoom maybe not associated so much with this magic, but you're right. I mean, in this case, it's enjoyable when you're having conversations like this, or when you're
Yeah.
meeting to do collaborations or something creative versus maybe something more compulsory. Just because we're having fun doesn't mean we're not doing something profound or useful or making a
Oh yeah.
serious contribution to the field. You mentioned a lot about science. I'm not a scientist, but the reason I enjoyed science was because I found like it's a lot of just trial and error in the beginning when you're approaching a problem in engineering or science. It's very much coming about it in a way that an artist would approach a problem and working with both the molding of ideas and materials to just try to come up with potential solutions, but also not getting stifled by dead ends or when things don't work. So the sciences also teach us to be flexible and to have patience. But that really comes from art. And I mean, art was the precursor to scientific thought because we are recording our observations about the natural world through reconstructing it artistically and envisioning how we perceive it from this careful observation. Like you mentioned earlier, just spending time and observing nuances of light and recreating it with the materials and objects that are available to you.
Yeah, we're just using different materials in different ways, but it's all um I guess just that creativity that comes out of that. And I find that it's like super, I was going to say stimulating, like that's what art is. And it's problem solving, it's a lot of problem solving in there. And even in play, you set yourself up, like as a kid, you set yourself up with like, I'm going to build this structure. And then you're like, oh, okay, it's going to topple over unless I figure out how I'm going to build this other thing. And um, so it's like we're constantly creating situations where we're looking to solve or create something, but through that there's like a constant engagement of making decisions and being creative. I'm thinking of like this very tactile engagement right now. I'm wiggling my fingers. Yeah, I just find that all of like that whole process exciting. To be human, to be engaged, and to feel alive. It really makes me feel alive to do that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mentioned that as part of exhibiting your work, you design and lead a lot of workshops for children.
Yeah.
So, I know you work in terms of this concept of backwards design. So I want to know what are some of the goals you have as an educator and how do you differentiate how you explain your process to intergenerational audiences?
I don't. I don't differentiate. um, yeah, when I do my workshops, they're creating miniature worlds. So I use different materials than, I mean, some of are the same materials, but like they'll use paper clips and pom poms and beads and different things. So the workshops were inspired by my bubble sculptures. So when I'd show them at museums and stuff, they were interested in like an educational component. And then I ended up going to Dubai, which was very cool. And at Art Dubai, exhibited the bubble sculptures, and then also ran the workshops where they created these little domed worlds. So, and then they also built like a huge um, city together. And so together they used different materials like blocks and like all like what else did we had? We had cups and blocks, and so everyday objects that they got to like contribute. So it was like this idea that we're all contributing and building the city together. And adults took part in it too, which was nice. And for the miniature worlds, it is like behind it was like, I think they're already there. I think they're already there. Yeah, of course I'm creating my own world, but I'm creating of course I'm doing this, but I guess to use it like as a model to think of like a sculpture as a potential, like a maquette for a, a building or a layout for a city, like Isaac Bodies Kingsless. I love his work. He uses like cardboard and wrappers and different things. He's passed now, but I saw his show. I saw his show in New York.
At MoMA, yeah.
MoMA. It was amazing. It was so
Yeah.
amazing. But he was like, "We are not a nation if we." I'm not going to get the quote right, but we're not a nation if we don't make like a model. And I have to look it up. But anyway, basically, he's saying we need to create. Are you going to recite it? Yeah.
Without a model, you are nowhere. A nation that can't make models is a nation that doesn't understand things. A nation that doesn't live. So yeah.
Yes, I love that. I love that.
I remember because I wrote about that in the article. I compared your work, actually, both your works. And essentially, a functioning or a good nation needs to see itself as potential, the model for potential or growth.
Right. And he's saying, like, basically, you need a model in order to do that. You need to have a vision. So his work was a vision for this functioning country, society, and like very kind of like Art Deco styled and colorful. And so it's not, I mean, it's beautiful looking, but it's just it's a feeling you get, it's like this kind of feeling. And I think with my work, I wanted to give that feeling. What would something visual be that would represent functioning and represents connectivity and healthy, vibrant communities and worlds. So, and you get that feeling. So it's like, it's not like I know the answers or he knew the answers, but it's like we need to embody something here. We need to have that potential for that.
We spoke about earlier, and you mentioned earlier that these are all tools that we're recycling and upcycling from our earliest foundations to now. And through our experiences, we obviously are more dexterous and we have maybe a little more vocabulary to impart those early inclinations to create something with our hands or minds and shape the world that we want to see. But it really hasn't changed much since we were kids, that mentality and that hope. The thing that's changed, unfortunately, is that we've been inundated with so much other things, distractions, and also crises and problems that have arose in part too, maybe because we've put those things aside, the idea that we should create because we want to feel a certain way, and a good feeling versus a monetary feeling, and creating something and building something because it makes us feel good, both individually and as a society. That's what is important. And that's where wealth is derived from realistically, because when we all feel better, we're more productive. So I think that was important to say that we need to think a little bit more with emotional intelligence, and things of that nature.
There's like the whole psychology behind architecture. It's like if we want to feel something, like, well, what kind of spaces do we need to create that give us that feeling or that bring about communication or, the goals that are there. So again, it's like that feeling, but then the goals, but then also like, how do we get there? So it's like through design and it does go back to that hands-on experience of like, well, what does a round shape versus, a rectangular shape? How do those shapes, like, if you're experiencing them, like, how does your body feel in these spaces? And, or if there's other people, if you're in your cubicles in your office, like, how does that feel instead of like an open space? And even like I have an artist that is going to give a talk at the gallery, and he was like, I want my artist talk to be in a circle shape. I want us to be in a circle when I give my artist talk because I find that So like sculptural, it's architecture, it's like the psychology behind things, what it brings out in people to like to bring about different feelings that I find that really interesting. In my sculptures, it's like they're kind of like forms and you're like observing them and but then to even think like very large scale. And I know other people are doing it all the time, so it's like this what designs are successful for different reasons.
Right. That there could be multiple designs and each one
Mhm.
important for numerous different reasons. There's a lot of variance that goes into it. And that goes back to the idea of just something has to be the right fit, which can mean multiple things, but when it is for reasons like we mentioned, emotional reasons or psychological reasons or physical reasons. If we're feeling good in a space, there's many reasons why. Most likely, there's probably sights, smells, feelings. It's an
Mhm.
overall sensory quality. And going back to the idea of work that's very successful, like even a Thomas Kincaid, where really, I don't get to talk much about Thomas Kincaid
Yeah.
as an art
Yeah.
historian, but
Yeah. Yeah.
he's an artist where you can maybe show his work alongside someone like a Rauschenberg, and I bet you 99.9% of the population is going to pick the Kincaid as a work. You ask them, prompt them with certain questions. Which work makes you happier? Which work would you rather live with or live inside or
Mhm.
interact with? And Rauschenberg is one of my favorite artists, and obviously I am much
Yeah.
more connected with him than a Kincaid, but I have that vocabulary of art history behind it. And I know Rauschenberg is a great example of, someone who has collaborated with engineers and scientists and really re-envisioned the everyday world into this great phenomena, of what we call STEAM now, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. He was a forerunner to showing us what's possible. But at the same time, for someone who might not know the breadth of his work or the ideas behind avant garde art, the Kincaid is something that's more easily recognizable on a sensory level and an emotional level. So, and that's what I love about art is that there are no wrong answers. It elicits this debate or
Yeah.
conversation, and we learn things through that, why other people feel a certain way looking at something and why someone likes something else. It could be simple as a particular color or shape, like we mentioned, but putting those principles and ideas and materials together is powerful because it can really shape and transform society. It's just the boldness that doing something like that, even having the audacity to do like what these avant-garde artists did, like Rauschenberg or whomever is, going to create work with scientists that leads to this playful progression of ideas throughout the course of civilization, which we obviously need. So, on that note, maybe ending with this, this question is very open ended, I think, and I just want to hear your thoughts because I've inspired by the work you make. And I just want to know, since your work envisions a more sustainable, connected, and cooperative future, what do you hope we can all achieve in the near future? And how can art be a serious but playful way of getting us there?
Art and especially play within art is like in that freedom, that creativity, and allowing ourselves to think of connectivity and like shared resources and all these kind of positive things that I would hope would be happening even more. I think it is through the artistic process and ways of thinking that like we can actually get to these places, get to these like evolve in different ways to even like building different structures or transportation or getting clean water to everybody, like that kind of thing. I do hope for things to evolve and for people to have a good standard of living and to work together and have community and think globally. And I think it is through these early ways of being. I mean, even things we learn in kindergarten about sharing, kind of basic things, It's like clean up after yourself, share this, play with this, be nice, be nice to people, very basic things that if we actually live by these things, it will help us, to kind of build maybe like a more peaceful, more cooperative world. So yeah.
Absolutely. I appreciate that outlook, and I appreciate the work you make that shows us that possibility and then implores us to use backwards design to find ways of making that achievable, turning those models into tangible structures that can sustain us. Art is a blueprint for not only the way things look, but the way things feel, as we spoke about, and how they can make us feel and how we want to feel. So if we want to feel good, work of art that makes us feel good, the hope is that it inspires us to do something in response to that feeling, to expand and extend upon that good feeling, and extend the vision or the narrative within that work of art. So we want these cities to happen that are connected and accessible, that we see in works of art. We have those tools. We keep speaking about that. We do have those tools from the get-go.
Right.
And
Right.
the foundation of all education, which has spurred us on, has been learning to produce and, as you said, share in the very beginning. So holding on to that.
I was just kind of thinking about, I was talking to a friend recently. I was like, oh, art is kind of like, he has like a tonka, like a fabric kind of, um, I guess in Buddhism, they have like these deities, and then under the fabric, like under this piece of fabric, and then you lift the fabric and you see the painted deities, and then you just put the fabric down and you meditate on that. And so I kind of think of art like that way, like you look at it and you take it with you, and then you can meditate on it and bring that into your life somehow. So I mean, kind of goes back to what we're talking about, looking and and how you take that back with you. So taking back these different feelings and then applying them in different ways in your life. It's like that's my hope, is that people would feel optimistic and kind of in their own way build their worlds with other people.
It's good that we have work like yours that shows us what we can strive towards, what we can still be hopeful of. There it is, tangible in the form of a model, and a model is what to strive towards. We want these models to be reality. Yeah.
I appreciate everything you're saying. So thank you so much. I really, yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's a great to get to chat with you about all these things too, and hear how play inspired your way of living and working as an artist. So that's always great. And I look forward to seeing more works that you make, and also to a future where these things become bigger size, life size, where
Yes.
we're able to walk into it.
People were saying that you should make these big, go big. I'm like, that would be amazing. Yeah. Yeah. So
Well, someone will be inspired by the work, and that's what it is to be
yeah.
an artist, is to inspire. I do think, the more people that see work like this with optimism and with reusing materials that would normally be discarded, how can we do that on a grand scale and turn these models into cityscapes, actual cityscapes or city blocks or new buildings, more sustainable buildings.
I think so
Yeah.
too.
I do too. Yeah. The next time we'll be talking about this, hopefully in the near future, we'll start seeing a little bit more of that. Thank you again for this discussion today. It was
Thank
great.
you for having me. This was wonderful. Thanks.